All right, well, just to get started here, quick intro. I'm Dave Stewart, founder and CTO of Cake. Cake's a tracking platform founded in 2010. Ultimately, we serve networks and advertisers, products for both. And we get to see kind of everything that's happening in the affiliate ecosystem through our 500 plus clients. And so excited to be here.
Hi, I'm David Sendroff. I'm the founder and CEO of Forensiq. We're a fraud detection platform that looks from end to end, from impressions to clicks to conversions, at the intent and integrity behind those actions. And we started in 2010 as well, and a partner with Cake.
Great. So real quick, what we'll be covering here. I'm going to go through kind of a history of affiliate marketing, kind of where it started, what we like to call the Wild Wild West. Talk a little bit about things to avoid. David will kind of brief you guys a little bit on some of the things that are happening that can be fraudulent to look out for. We'll talk a little bit about what you should be doing, and then kind of follow up with the summary at the end and give you guys a chance for some questions. So again, we call this kind of the Wild Wild West, where things started. This concept of cost per acquisition or cost per action, right? Very, very appealing to an advertiser. Ultimately, no risk, right? As opposed to CPC, where you're paying for every single click. This idea of no risk, I'm only going to pay out when something actually converts. Sorry, I was just interrupted. CPA, very, very appealing, right? So the question is, why has it taken so long to get traction? And removing risk, that's something that we've kind of seen over the years, where it's gotten a little bit more believable. Some of the reasons why it hasn't is ultimately because there's so much that happened at the beginning of affiliate marketing when it came to no transparency. You couldn't really tell where traffic was coming from. You didn't necessarily know whether there was quality or not. There was a lot of fraudulent entries. There's big businesses of overseas companies that all they did was try to pull the wool over advertisers' eyes. The data was potentially inaccurate. You had these systems in place where integrations were lacking, and you had companies were passing data and ultimately accepting 10% discrepancy on all tracking that was happening. And so you just kind of let 10% of your profits go, and you're just okay with it. That's kind of how things started. And one of the reasons actually we started Cake was that we didn't find that acceptable. And then fraud, like we were talking before. Affiliates were not properly vetted. So you'd have companies that would basically have an overseas someone working for them that was basically masking their phone number and setting up these fake corporations and signing up as affiliates and then handing it off to a company that was ultimately all they were going to do is run bot traffic and ultimately fake conversions. And then you had like the high-profile cookie stuffing cases with eBay and Amazon, where they were just pop-ups galore, ultimately placing a cookie and then giving credit to affiliates that weren't due. This, unfortunately, was actually one of the bigger things that led to why CPA and why affiliate has gotten a bad name, is because these big guys who you need on your team, who have to be part of this ecosystem, were not happy about this and ultimately kind of tarnished the image there. And then again, I kind of mentioned sophisticated botnets and overseas teams. You also had incentivized offers where most of you guys probably know what that means. Ultimately, click here and we'll send you this, and ultimately fill out this form even if you're not really interested, because we're going to give you something in return. Advertisers need to approve those type of offers, and most of the time they weren't, right? And then what we like to call lotions and potions, where you had a ton of promises made on specific products, whether they were face creams or whatever it be, that led to the FTC getting involved when it came to marketing practices. And so ultimately this led to affiliate marketing not really being taken seriously and really being too risky, with fraud rampant and very difficult to manage. So what's happened over the years? Well, ultimately some of these things have improved, but there are absolutely still issues out there. And so the lackluster tools is something that we feel wasn't really addressed until recently, where you didn't really have visibility as to where traffic was coming from still. Things were buried. You didn't necessarily could get to the data granularity that we were looking for. And you had these high-profile outages with the tracking platforms where they would be down for an entire day, right? Imagine how much money you can lose in an entire day of a tracking platform being down, literally in the tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars for certain companies. And then ultimately, wasn't necessarily incentivization for high-quality traffic. You would just kind of treat all traffic the same way, and you really want to make sure your high-quality affiliates are specifically called out and that you're actually giving them some incentive to do better. And then bad business models. I think a lot of you guys are familiar with this. You have networks without exclusive offers and no differentiation. Ultimately, in the ecosystem, if you're not actually providing something valuable or unique, then you're just kind of another player and ultimately taking your thin margin in the middle and not necessarily providing a ton of value. And so there's a lot of these popping up. And a lot of times they would get away with actually making money based on this idea that they would even be like scrubbing off the top of specific payouts. They'd offer you a lower payout or a higher payout to an affiliate, and so they'd sign with them for a higher payout, but then ultimately not tell the affiliate about a certain amount of conversion. So ultimately they're making their money back that way. It was very shady. You had networks without direct affiliates only working with other networks. So if all your affiliates are other networks, then you're not really providing a ton of value. And then affiliate payments occurring before the conversions were confirmed. Ultimately, you have an advertiser that's paying a network on like a monthly basis, but the affiliates are demanding payouts very, very quickly, even weekly, right? Well, that float sits somewhere, right? And who's actually going to cover that? And when the advertiser decides that, hey, a portion of this was fraudulent, but you've already paid the affiliate, you're in bad shape and you go bankrupt, you go out of business. We see it all the time, even today. Very, very common. And then ultimately, the remaining and reputable affiliates get hurt by this, right? They're the ones that whenever this company goes out of business because of a few bad actors, ultimately they're the ones that don't get paid and they should be. So again, there have been improvements in this, but these are some of the things that we still see.
So now we'll talk a little about what to avoid. There's a number of impacts when it comes to fraud. And so from the affiliate perspective, from the advertiser perspective, you're dealing with fulfillment costs. So someone enters stolen and recycled information. Now you're paying out for the call center or shipment type costs. There's the product costs that you might have paid. And then affiliate payments where you may be making advance payments to affiliates before you actually either collect payments or realize that revenue. So there's a number of risks there. Certainly from a network perspective, you could lose an advertiser relationship or have a major chargeback. We've seen advertisers charge back even as far as 3 months out. They'll go back and realize it's, whole string of fraudulent conversions. So there's a number of risks when it comes to fraud. So we've seen pretty much every fraud tactic out there. Dave touched upon this. One of them is infiltrating networks where you'll get someone who can go through the due diligence process, answer all the questions to get vetted into the network, and then they can turn around and sell that account for $50 or $100. And so it's really simple. And because this is such a whack-a-mole game, they'll sell that to the fraudster. They commit small amounts of fraud underneath that account. And if they get caught, they just move on to the next account and through many different networks. They're acquiring stolen identities a number of ways. So for instance, they can, for one, you can buy stolen credit card information for as little as $1 each. But also, they may be recycling information. I'll show you on another slide here. They're spoofing characteristics to make it appear as if the users are submitting information from different locations, from different devices. And then they're manipulating their IPs in many different ways through the use of proxies, VPNs, bots. It's very, very simple to get either public lists or even sometimes they're using hosting providers to be able to have unique IP addresses and can just get thousands of IPs to submit information through the forums. And then incentivization, Dave touched upon this a little bit. We've seen a number of cases of this. For instance, they might go out to Craigslist. You think you're applying to a job. Maybe it drives you to a job portal or a credit check, credit repair offer. And so just by manipulating the marketing message, it's people will fill out the form. They're getting paid for this. And sometimes it can be confusing even for for some of the call centers, just based on the way that the message was created. It can take some time to uncover these sort of things. And also, there's not a whole lot of transparency into the original campaign, for instance. So if it was in some email or it was on the web somewhere, it's not as simple to go back and see what it was they clicked on or what they took action on. So here's an example of a message we saw out there. So who can help me apply to a CPA affiliate network and handle calling affiliate networks to get account approval? You must have experience with CPA marketing, know how to promote offers with all kinds of methods, email, PPC, websites. I need these accounts. And there's some very well-known affiliate networks up here, and there's not a single affiliate network out there that's not on these lists. So there are all these accounts are being sold and traded. Here's the idea with recycling data is someone will set up an offer, get your degree in medical billing, capture John Smith's information once, and then they turn around and submit John's info 5 or 10 times so that information becomes diluted. The call center might call John, someone might get an enrollment out of John's info, but it's very, very low converting. It's very difficult for the call center to understand the tactic here. And there's entire companies set up just for this purpose to create these really recycled leads. I mean, there's notorious fraudsters who are doing this. And then here's a Firefox plugin we came across. The idea is it allows you to rotate through user agents, IP addresses, through change your refer. And so what looks like, in this case, an Apple web browser using Chrome. Meanwhile, it's in Firefox. And they're coming from AOL email, it appears. And you click on random, it will go through Yahoo and Hotmail and all the other refers. So it looks like email-based traffic. And at the top here, there's a proxy plugin. And so it can just rotate through this list of proxies. Now they take that recycled information, whether it's credit card information, lead information, and they're submitting the forms. They have very inexpensive workers who are able to sit there and just plug that information in. So it's really simple to do that. Now, we've done studies in a number of different verticals, in online education, insurance, financial offers. And what we looked at was when we're flagging things as high risk, meaning they're using proxies, spoofing, hosting providers, all these different fraud tactics, what was the correlation between that and underwriting rates, enrollment rates, all the different conversion metrics that tie into revenue? And what we found was that it was somewhere around 7 times less likely to turn into revenue. And when they were converting into revenue, it was because they are, in many cases, recycling real information. So there may be some conversions that come out of that data, but certainly it's not something you'd want to pay for, and you'd rather direct your campaign to other high-performing traffic.
All right, so a little bit of the things that we think you should be doing or pay attention to or at least be knowledgeable about. One of the things we're going to start with here is this concept of attribution, right? So who deserves credit for the conversion that just came in? Imagine that on a lot of conversions that are occurring, the same consumer has been hit multiple times. So you talk about from an advertiser's perspective, it's multi-channel, right? So you have the affiliate channel is just one part of this customer journey that's occurring, and potentially they're seeing retargeting, display, they're seeing, they're getting emails, they're seeing ads on Facebook. You've all seen that where the ad will follow you around. And ultimately, these are all touches that are important in understanding specifically in the context of this gathering here, like how affiliate actually played a role in this is really, really important. We go back to those high-profile cases of like eBay getting cookie stuffed. Ultimately, you have those touches that are really not meaningful, and everybody is getting those cookies on their browser. So when you convert on Amazon, you think that that's important. Now, ultimately, that happens a lot more than just to high-profile advertisers. That's happening all over the place. And so understanding what touches are occurring is really, really important. I think a lot of people have gotten really used to first and last touch, right? Are you first touch or you last touch? Are you giving credit to the first affiliate that was part of this customer journey or the last one? And you just kind of ignore everything in the middle. When you do that, you're missing a lot. You're missing out on what's actually happening. And ultimately, you really want to understand kind of what's happening from when they first saw it ultimately to what's converting for a few reasons, right? One, just so you understand how to optimize that conversion funnel, the path that they're going down, know how to best spend your money, know how to cut out some of the bad actors if there are affiliates in the middle that shouldn't be, understanding what the affiliates are even doing if they're doing something they shouldn't be there. And so, yeah, we like to say that first and last touch is just not good enough anymore. And so it's hard because affiliates want a really simple payout, right? Either weekly or monthly, they just want the CPA. It's every time they're going to be, it's called a $10 CPA, and the math is super easy to figure out how much I'm owed at the end of the month, right? Now, that is a very difficult thing to change, and I think it's going to take the advertisers kind of that are the gold kind of sets the standard, right? So the advertisers, the money's flowing downstream there, and ultimately they're the ones that are going to have to start doing this and actually start potentially paying out with partial payments. And that scares a lot of people, but ultimately we see it coming, and so I'm just kind of pointing that out, that we see this idea of attribution and things becoming more visible to this world where you're actually getting paid out partially based on how much you deserve as part of this customer journey. If you were just 20% of the reason why they converted, then potentially you should only get paid 20% of that potential payout that would be there. And that's hard. That's hard to take in for a lot of people. But ultimately, we do see this occurring, whether it's now or in 5 years from starting with the advertisers and going downstream. And then some of the challenges with it, I kind of already mentioned that affiliates want simple and predictable payouts. And then I think one of the big things is that tools have traditionally been lacking support for this. So most of tracking platforms have just supported one, at the end of this conversion path, they're just going to attribute their conversion to one single affiliate, and then that would be it. And you wouldn't necessarily even know who else was involved in this path. And so you're starting to see the tools now there to have a better picture of the entire involvement.
So from an attribution perspective, we see a number of threats that come from fraud. So for instance, malware and fraudulent links are, through malware, what they're able to do is actually force these actions into the browser. Toolbars, malware, and those actions could be clicks, impressions. A lot of times you're not able to understand the fact that they've loaded an entire website in the background of the browser. So that what happens is if you were to organically go to those websites and someone were to convert, the person who forced that click is going to get the credit for that forced action. There's Dave mentioned the cookie stuffing case with eBay and Amazon. There's a number of these type of cases, and really we've seen even cases where advertisers, they might be advertising, placing an ad, and in the background of that ad even forcing the click. So there's a lot of these tricks that they're playing. Now the key is you can actually control when that cookie is loaded and when you're actually dropping that cookie essentially through fraud detection. So you can wrap a layer around whatever your method of attributing to that attribution is, just to make sure that you're catching the cookie stuffers and then properly crediting them.
Next topic here, for kind of those advertisers, people from brands in the audience. There's the traditional model is working with the massive or super networks. You have the commission junctions, you have the link shares, and ultimately 100% of your traffic is coming from these. That's definitely not what we like to advocate. When you actually look across what's occurring within those, you'll see that on average 90% of a brand's traffic comes from 10% of its publishers. And so if you're working through this like CJ only, then ultimately you have to understand that if only 10% of the traffic is coming, or sorry, if 90% of the traffic is coming from those 10, why would you not just go around them and work with those affiliates directly, right? Why not go for better payout terms? Why not have a direct relationship? There's so many advantages to doing that that it just doesn't make sense. So what we advocate is ultimately work with both, right? Don't ditch the CJs, don't ditch the link shares. They're ultimately use them as the long tail, but then make direct relationships with affiliates where you can actually have those negotiated payout terms, where you can have a dialogue on how to improve the situation, where you can actually incentivize them directly with potentially higher payouts for higher quality traffic. And so you'll see, again, high commission fees when you don't. And then you do have a very big lack of transparency when you're going through these other networks too. So again, we completely advocate working with them, but ultimately as only a portion of the traffic. One of the things we want to call out is obviously the growth of mobile. Everyone knows that, and you've probably all seen studies where mobile is dominating and growing like crazy. Very, very true. Obviously, in all the tracking that we see it growing very, very steadily, even across affiliate traffic. And one of the stats here is that it's 29% of e-commerce transactions in the US and 34% globally. As a lot of you guys know, in some of the up-and-coming countries, they're mobile first, right? They never even had a computer. Now they have a cell phone that has access to the internet, which is just a game changer. And some of the trends, 10% growth in Q1 of 2015. And you can see in most countries, transactions are now, the majority of them coming from smartphones, and you see that conversion rates are improving. Back in the day, people didn't want to fill out like a form or actually buy something on their phone. That's changing pretty dramatically. You have more and more people spending time actually making their websites responsive. You have native apps that are making it really, really easy to purchase things, to fill things out. And so the things that were stopping people from buying things on their phone before no longer do, and you're seeing a lot of conversions happening there. And then you can see mobile commerce on track to be 40% of e-commerce by the end of 2015, which is a very, very big number. One of the things that we advocate from a tracking perspective is, first off, just understanding kind of how conversions or tracking could work within mobile. Mobile web, so if you open like on an iPhone, if you have your Safari browser, or on an Android, you have a Chrome in there, works pretty much exactly like desktop, right? There's really no big difference. There's still cookies being placed. You are tracking from site to site. You still have all the power that you did when you were on desktop tracking. Versus native apps, you now see a lot of the of CPI. So you're actually cost per install, where you're monetizing installs for specific apps. And the way that those are tracked is slightly different. You now have this unique identifier tied to the device. You don't have cookie access anymore, but you have a unique identifier on the device. And there's a lot of high-profile news stories about that being an issue from a privacy perspective, because previously you couldn't change your ID, and so now you have Apple coming out with a way to the same way you could clear your cookies, you can now reset your IDFA on like an iPhone. You have Google probably not doing as much of that ultimately, because we all know that they're completely supported by advertising, so they're trying to make it easier to track. So there is you do see that difference there. But then also one of the big things in native is not just tracking installs, but also the in-app events, right? Imagine a game where every level that they pass, that entails that they're engaging with your brand a little bit more, and so you're actually monetizing that. Imagine paying an affiliate out every time they've passed a level or they've purchased virtual currency. That makes it really, really enticing for an affiliate to get involved when they know that they're not just going to get paid on the installs, but ultimately for everything that they do afterward. And that can rack up. You see how many people how much mobile apps are used now, and how long even kids spend on their mobile phones. There's potentially a lot that can be done there, and so getting creative about what you're actually paying out on and providing and making appealing to your affiliates is really important.
Now, with all the revenue flowing into mobile, there's a number of risks you have to look out for. So last week, actually, we had a major study come out that you may have read about. We uncovered something called mobile device hijacking, and it was covered in pretty much every publication out there. What we found was we listened into bid stream data, where it's just hundreds of billions of mobile actions per month, where we were able to identify 5,000 apps that were committing this hijacking. So essentially what it was in the background of the device. They might show in the foreground one ad, and in the background 5 or 10 more would appear within that device. So we virtualized the mobile environment, installed the apps, so that we could make a video and record this to show, here's what's happening on screen, and here's what's happening off screen. So you could see all the advertisers that were not just paying out on impressions, but they were actually clicking on many of the ads as well. So it would throw off CTRs, certainly pass those device IDs on, and so it was creating a lot of action there. Now, from the consumer's perspective, it was using 2 gigs of data per day, just crazy amount of data, which I think is part of why it became such a big story as well. But that's just one example of the type of fraud that's happening. And we estimated it was somewhere around $1 billion a year was being lost to this type of fraud. Other things we see in mobile, one is device emulation. So they're able to take a virtual machine, similar to how we created this video, load in an environment, let's say Android, and go and simulate web traffic through that virtual machine. They can also simulate installs through those virtualized environments. So load up the virtual machine, create the install, wipe it out, create a new device ID. So it's really simple to do that type of install fraud. Device hijacking, which I mentioned, app jacking and click jacking, where you might be browsing, let's say, within mobile web, and you click on something and it drives you somewhere completely different than you would expect, perhaps to the App Store, the Play Store, driving you to an install and get a lot of, it's almost incentivized in a sense, or just there's no intent there for the user to actually install this. But this we're seeing is a common thing. And then similarly in mobile, we do see incentivization as an issue where, again, it's hard to have full transparency into what message they have within the app. And so they're clicking or taking some sort of action. And so there's a number of risks in mobile, but there are real-time protections really to stay on top of these threats and to make sure that if you're moving into that channel, that you're protected.
I'm going to try and get through these next few slides pretty quickly because I think we're a little behind on time. Ultimately, targeting is something you should be very, very focused on. Building specific creatives for the audience, having tons and tons of creatives that are very optimized for who your audience really is. Basically, sending traffic to specific landing pages based on country or language. If you are doing stuff international, it's really important to have that level of targeting, especially and not even throwing away traffic. I think a lot of times we see that, hey, I can only take US traffic, and so ultimately I'm getting 20% of my traffic from overseas. I'm not doing anything with it, right? Find a different offer, right? Redirect them to something that you can monetize in that situation. You don't want to necessarily throw that opportunity or money away. Device-specific landing pages. So you'll see landing pages specifically made for iPhone or specifically made for Android. And then click scoring, which is actually something that we've collaborated a lot on, where we can actually give you a real-time click score in Cake on every click that's coming in. And then based on that score, we can send you to an offer that makes the most sense for it. So if you had a really, really bad click score, ultimately can send you to a low-risk offer versus if we think it's pretty clean, then ultimately send you somewhere else where we're not necessarily as worried. Payout granularity, I've kind of mentioned this before, but ultimately making it really interesting and appealing to the affiliates to run higher quality traffic. So whether that's specific sub-IDs, calling them out because you see the traffic from this specific sub-ID is really good and giving just that sub-ID a high payout, or whether it's like volume-based payout tiers to incentivize affiliates to run more traffic whenever they are doing well. All of these things are things to keep in mind. Penny conversions, so the idea of, and this is actually taken much bigger hold like in the UK and the European markets, where ultimately an advertiser won't actually pay out a network or an affiliate until they've approved the conversion. And so understanding that this is legitimate, that it's past the situation where there could be a chargeback because we found out this is a real person, they wait until that happens. It's in this pending state until it's approved, at which point that passes it on. Now that means affiliates get paid slower, right? It does. It means that you're waiting to make sure that these are approved before it happens. But ultimately, this is a much lower risk method of doing things. And we actually we expect it to, especially now that the tools are available, we expect it to gain traction in the US as well. Real-time status updates, so specifically in lead gen, getting more information back from the buyers of the data that you're selling data to buyers, and ultimately they have a lot of information in their CRM about whether or not the lead is actually converted, how far they got in the funnel with them. All of that is super, super interesting and information you want to tie back to the affiliates or the traffic sources that generated those leads. If you don't have that, you don't necessarily really know quality. You understand how much you're selling, but that's not necessarily sustainable long term. You really need to understand what's happening with those leads as they move along. And then retail data. We see, if you're actually promoting offers that are for the purpose of selling things on an e-commerce site, for instance, being able to use things like voucher codes to do attribution, and also understanding where voucher codes can be difficult, where we've all done it, right? Where you're on a checkout page and asks you for a coupon code, and you immediately go open a new tab, go look up a code, put it in. Ultimately, that code's going to get attributed back to somebody. And is that really why they checked out on your site or why they actually bought something? Probably not. So it's something to keep in mind, where you don't necessarily want to give all the credit to the voucher code holder or the affiliate that was assigned that. You potentially maybe want to give them a little bit of credit. And understanding what other touches were involved is really important to do that. And then data granularity, understanding what they purchased is really important, right? Because if I have a shoe sale, for instance, I want to know which affiliates or traffic sources have done really well for me in the past whenever in terms of selling shoes. Maybe it's a targeted list that they have that for whatever reason converts better with that type of offer.
So we did a survey with our clients, different types of advertisers and networks, just to hear how do they see the industry going, and some of the themes we saw. One was increased trust. So what we're finding is that advertisers are putting more and more money in to the industry because there are tools that allow them to have the transparency and more trust and understanding of what type of traffic is coming through. There are more and more brands are moving into the channel as well. Now, we're seeing industry impose regulations. So, for instance, TCPA is a certain type of compliance that regulation that's come in around call centers and calling data. But I think affiliates happen to push the limits, which drives these new regulations that come into play, which is great because the more they push the limits, the more regulation, then affiliates are now changing and actually following. Many of them are having to self-police and follow these new guidelines. So there's a lot of self-regulation that's happening because of that. And then in a lot of ways, the focus has shifted out of R&D for many of these networks and even advertisers, where in the past you may have had to go and build your own tracking platform or fraud detection solution to understand the quality. And now you can really focus on growing your business and outside of these type of tools that are easily available.
So I wanted to spend a little bit of time on this. This is kind of some of the things that we see as coming in the near future. You see it all over the place. You see in the rest of ad tech outside of affiliate, you see a huge focus on gathering data and building these consumer profiles. And that's something that needs to make its way into affiliate marketing, honestly. And so more focus on data and optimizations. DMPs. DMPs are data management platforms, ultimately are tied in. Most of the time you hear them in the context of ad servers, where you're serving a specific ad based on your knowledge that a consumer is within a certain age range, a certain gender, has specific interests, have converted on other things in the past. This DMP data is all over the place, and there's questions about how accurate it is and which providers to work with. But ultimately, we definitely think that this needs to be a bigger focus, is leveraging this type of data that's out there to target better. And so, working with affiliates who are proven in targeted segments. Imagine that in your tracking, you can actually see that 70% of a specific affiliate's traffic is coming from males age 18 to 23, right? That gives you a lot of really interesting information as to how to specifically, if you have a campaign that's available or an offer that's available that's better suited for that type of audience, who to approach and how to get the most bang for your buck. Machine learning. It's basically this concept of crunching your data better in a more automated way to really understand and gather insight from the data that you have. So whether that's building recommendation engines and really calling out better the affiliates that are driving specific higher quality to very specific offers, understanding where the low quality really is and really calling that out to make it really easy to drop affiliates or to restructure an agreement with an affiliate. Prediction engines target users based on the likelihood of conversion. So that's actually on the click in the same way that an ad server would target a specific person, doing that as part of kind of the affiliate tracking mechanism. And then the last thing I wanted to call out is that performance marketing does not just equal affiliate marketing. And so it's a really big concept because we see CPA getting much, much bigger in the traction that it deserves. Now that some of these things are out there, now that you have a Forensiq that can actually take away a lot of the risk that's there and give you the security to know that you're not going to have to necessarily be worried as much about fraud. CPA is something that should gain traction and become bigger and bigger. And then, yeah, ultimately to the point where we think be taken very seriously by big brands and then ultimately all the way downstream. And so just to recap, data collection, anywhere and everywhere. Use the data that you have. The only true differentiator you have as a company is to leverage the data and your understanding of your audience better than anybody else. And there's no one size fits all there. Your specific audience is going to be slightly different than anybody else's, even within the same vertical. You just do things a little differently. And understanding those small differences are really important. And so gathering insight in your data is huge. And then understanding attribution, targeting granularly, and then optimizing on those, also big.
And centralized intelligence, I think, is an important theme. Dave touched upon DMPs, all this collective information. Similarly, within fraud detection, where everyone's feeding a global fraud database, you can catch fraud much quicker. So there's just power in the collaboration and everyone feeding into these databases. And then really setting fraud detection up in real time allows you to proactively block transactions. So you're not having to deal with end-of-month disputes and all sorts of other issues, fulfillment issues that go with dealing with this type of traffic.
So with that, questions?
No questions?
Nothing. Okay, crickets.
You answered everything.
We covered it? Maybe a lot of content. Hopefully that's a good thing. Yes,
Yep.
You had a question over here?
Maybe it's not the best question, but what kind of service do you offer in combination with head office actually?
In combination?
Head office.
Yeah, so we are integrated with their platform. Sure.
Okay.
Any other questions? All right.
All right. Well, feel free to come and talk to us here after. I appreciate the time, guys.